Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now on the phone is Colonel Andrew Bacevich, author of the New York Times bestseller, Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War. Colonel Bacevich is also a professor of history and international relations at Boston University. And Professor, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, we learned of a major bombshell in hearings into the Benghazi attack yesterday when Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and General Martin Dempsey testified that President Obama was virtually absent the night of the attack, which left 4 Americans dead. Panetta testified that he spoke only once that night to the commander-in-chief and that the president didn't even call during the 6-hour-long attack. Are you surprised that the president wasn't involved, and does he have to account for his leadership here, as Senator Lindsey Graham says?
Well, I have to say, I think that this Benghazi story has been blown wildly out of proportion. And when I say that, I don't mean to minimize the significance of 4 Americans being killed, but we've had thousands of Americans killed over the past decade in Iraq and Afghanistan. And to my mind, there's a striking gap between the howls for accountability with regard to Benghazi and the apparent absence of any interest in accountability when it comes to Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, I guess I wish the president had been a little bit more responsive, but truly this is making a mountain out of, if not exactly a molehill, certainly a less than significant event.
Based on what you know, Professor, could the military have been deployed in time had requests for help and support been heeded? I mean, could lives have been saved here?
Yes, but, and the but is, given the number of diplomatic posts we have around the world, given the number of Americans that are scattered around the world and undertaking all kinds of activities, if we had the capacity to say that at a particular place on the face of the earth is going to be a place where there's going to be an episode of violence the day after tomorrow, then I suppose the Pentagon could position some kind of assets there. But it's a great big world. U.S. military resources are, as great as they are nonetheless limited. And so it's a little bit silly, I think, to think that whenever something bad happens anywhere, that we're supposed to have C-130 gunships hovering over the scene of the activity. It's not surprising that we didn't have the assets in place, and it's unrealistic to think that the military is always going to have assets in place in order to deal with a contingency. Let us remember that on 9/11, when we had that assault on our homeland, not in Benghazi, but in Manhattan, the Pentagon wasn't able to respond.
Now, turning to the drone program, CIA Director nominee John Brennan yesterday defended President Obama's use of drones, the program to kill Americans overseas if it's thought they're associated with Al-Qaeda. What do you make of this program, and is it dangerous for Americans?
Well, I think it's. I'm sort of surprised that the media is sort of just discovering what's been going on for the past several years. It's discovered in the sense that there have been these reports of this increasing emphasis on drone strikes, and it's only now, in a sense, that somehow people are saying, "Hey, wait a second, this might be significant." It is significant. What we see, I think, is what President Obama's approach to warfare is. His predecessor thought it was a grand idea to invade and occupy countries. That produced disastrous results. Now President Obama has decided that using drones as an instrument of assassination is a lower risk way of continuing what we used to call the global war on terror, and to include Americans on the target list. I think it's constitutionally disastrous. The claims that some form of due process are being exercised, I think those claims are completely bogus. And I think that the whole notion of assassination as a way to deal with whatever threat is posed by violent Islamism is strategically suspect because it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere. There's no clear indication of how many people we're going to be able to kill we're going to have to kill before we can say, okay, the job's done, the mission's complete. So I think there's great need to have a very lively debate over what the president and his administration have been actually doing for the past several years.
So do you believe then that the program needs judicial review, and should Congress get involved?
Well, I mean, I'm inclined to say yes, except that these days when Congress gets involved, almost inevitably the results are less than productive. But there does need to be some kind of an oversight. I think that the notion that the President of the United States should exercise the authority, consulting only with his advisors, in secret, behind closed doors, the notion that the President of the United States should have the authority to kill Americans on his own say-so is exceedingly dangerous.
All right, what role should targeted drone killings play in a national security policy, in your view?
Well, I think they probably do have some role in the context of some larger strategy. What is the strategy? What is the object of the exercise? Are we engaged in an effort to try to destroy Islamism? Well, I don't think drone attacks are going to achieve that objective. The real question here, I think, that ought to be directed to people like Mr. Brennan as he undergoes confirmation hearings is, we understand you're a supporter of drone attacks. Please explain the strategic framework in which these attacks are being carried out. Toward what end? There needs to be some purpose other than simply knocking off bad guys one at a time.
Mm-hmm. What about John Brennan? Should he be confirmed for CIA director? And what about Chuck Hagel? Do you think he should be confirmed for Secretary of Defense?
Well, my general inclination is that presidents, regardless of what party, that presidents ought to be able to pick their own team. And that barring evidence of a record of criminal activity or a pattern of personal misconduct, then to my mind, they ought to be confirmed. There's nothing about either of these guys that somehow puts them, even though the charge is made about Hagel, that puts them outside the mainstream of U.S. national security thinking. They are, in fact, both very conventional figures, and I say that acknowledging that Hagel may have a certain reluctance about committing U.S. ground troops, but I mean, it's not as if he's some kind of a crazy left-wing peacenik, for God's sake.
Professor, last question for you. $1.2 trillion in across-the-board spending cuts, otherwise known as sequestration, are set to kick in. Half of those cuts we know will come from defense. Because of this fiscal uncertainty, the Defense Department has cut its carrier fleet in the Persian Gulf to just one. How do you see these cuts impacting our military, and is sequestration disastrous, as some say?
I think that there's a lot of posturing going on by the Pentagon to try to make it sound as if it's going to be disastrous. I mean, it's not $1.2 trillion in cuts in the present year. It's cuts that are spread over the course of a decade or so. And the fact of the matter is the Pentagon has grown enormously fat in its budget over the course of the past decade. And given that the Iraq war is over and the Afghanistan war is heading to a conclusion, they're going to have to cut back, and they need to figure out a way to do it in a responsible way. But we shouldn't take too seriously the notion that the sky is falling in just because certain budget cuts are going to be required.
All right, Professor Andrew Bacevich, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.